I don't want to interrupt. You guys finish up. Everybody else is going to be able to do this. Okay, so for every relation, the x and y, to find the inverse, we just switch the x and the y. So this is a relation. And a relation, when we can list the points, we can just flip the x and the y. The relation is written as r to the negative 1, and that means the inverse. It doesn't mean put 1 over r like a negative exponent. But we really don't care about relations. We spend all of our time talking about functions. So a function is 1-to-1 if it passes both the horizontal So a function is 1-to-1 if it passes both the horizontal and vertical line test. The relation and the inverse are both functions if it's 1-to-1. So when we look at a graph, it's a function if it passes the vertical line test. The horizontal line test is used to decide if the inverse is a function. So both, it has to pass the vertical and the horizontal line test if it's going to be 1-to-1. So for me to look at the graph, if I look at this graph, does it pass the vertical line test? Yes, that means that this is a function. Does it pass the horizontal line test? That means that the inverse is a function, and since it passed both, this graph is 1-to-1. So does this pass the vertical line test? Yes. So this graph is a function. Does the graph pass the horizontal line test? So the inverse is not a function, so this is not 1-to-1. Does this pass the vertical line test? Yes. Does it pass the horizontal line test? Yes. So this is 1-to-1. Does this pass the vertical line test? Yes. I know it looks like this, but it does. Does it pass the horizontal? Yes. So this is 1-to-1. Means it's a function and the inverse is a function. Does this pass the vertical line test? That means this is a function. Does it pass the horizontal line test? No. So the inverse is not a function, so this is not 1-to-1. Does this pass the vertical line test? No. So this is not 1-to-1. So the inverse of a function is written like this. So the inverse of f of x. And not all functions have inverse functions. So it's going to fail the horizontal line test if it doesn't have an inverse. So what two parent functions can you think of that would fail and not pass? Which one do we spend all our time talking about almost? Does this pass? Does that pass the horizontal line test? So the quadratic doesn't have an inverse. And what parent function looks like a quadratic? The absolute value. And doesn't have an inverse because it fails the horizontal line test. So we did this last year. To solve for the inverse, we just switch the x and y and then solve for y. So since this is my y variable, I'm going to make this x. And once you switch the x and the y, you want to solve for y. So I'm going to add 8. And I'm going to divide by 4. So it is 2, but can I write it like this? Is that the same thing? I divided by 4, so it's like 1/4 times this. I can. So why do you think I want to write it like that? I know what I did. Thanks. I'm well aware of what I did. But why did I write it like this, y'all? Because it's to graph it, right? Because now this is a vertical compression, and this is a shift of 8 to the left. Okay? So this is the inverse of that. So let's look at all of these examples, and let's see if we don't have to do some. See if you find a quadratic or an absolute value. Are there any? 12. So this is no inverse because it fails the horizontal line test. Yeah, you do. Or you can solve one or the other. Okay, so let's do number 8. Switch the x and the y. And to solve for y, I'm going to add 1. How do I get rid of the 1/2? If I multiply by 2, what happens? What happens here? That cancels, but I still have this on this side, correct? So what's the reciprocal of y to the third? The cube root. So I'm going to take the cube root. So I end up with, is the 2 a horizontal stretch or a horizontal compression? Of a half, and then a shift of 1 to the left. So let's do number 10 right under it. So if this is y, when I change them, I'm going to go ahead and put a 1 under the x and cross multiply. So go ahead and do that. Honey, sit up. So when I cross multiply, what happens? Next. What am I trying to solve for? So what am I going to have to do? Well, then we're going to end up with this upside down. Can I go ahead and distribute? What am I trying to get by itself? The y. So can I add the 8x now? And how do I get the y by itself? I'm going to divide by x. And when I do that, I get this. 5 plus 8x over x. No, it's close, but no. But I do have to restrict the domain because what can I not divide by? 0. So the domain is going to have to be x such that x does not equal 0. What is the other function we have to watch to restrict the domain? When we divide and when I take the square root, because I can't take the square root of a negative number. So look at this one right here. If I look at this, first of all, I just want to sketch real quick. So what does the negative do? What does it do? It reflects it over x, right? So instead of going this way, it's going to be upside down. Hey, boys, wake up. I'm tired too. So this is going to be upside down here, right? And then the plus 2, which way does that shift? 2 to the left, and then the minus 7 is going to be down here, right? So my new function is going to look like this. Well, yeah, you should. And here's why. Because what's the domain of this? It's going to be x greater than or equal to negative 2. And the range is going to be y is less than or equal to negative 7. So when I find the inverse, what do I do? What do you do with the domain and range? You just flip them, right? So when I find this, I'm going to switch, and I'm going to have negative 7 in my domain. All right? So the first thing I'm going to do is add the 7. And next I'm going to divide by negative 1, and when I do, I'm just going to put it in front because we're going to use it for graphing. And then what's the reciprocal of square root? Squared. And I have to subtract the 2. So when I do this, this is a parabola, right? And it's upside down, negative 7, negative 2. So I'm going to restrict on the x's to which side? What do you think? Probably this side, because this was less than negative 7. So we want x less than negative 7. Because we're only going to take this side. We only had part of the square root, right? So this is the part we're going to use. Does that make sense? We only had part of it to start. All right, 2 more. So number 13 is the easiest one. So when I switch the x and the y, I'm going to put a 1 under this and cross multiply. And what's the reciprocal of the cube root? So I'm just going to add the 9 then. So the 4, is it a horizontal stretch or horizontal compression? Compression of a 4th. Okay, on the last one. I'm going to add 1. I'm going to divide by 3, but I'm going to do like I did last time so it's out in front. And then what do I do with the y squared? I have to square root. And what did we say we can't have underneath the square root? It can't be negative, right? So the x plus 1, I want my domain to be x greater than or equal to -1.